wherever you are, everyone. My name is James. I'm an alcoholic. Incredibly grateful to be here this evening. I am currently in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a sobriety date. It's May 1st, 2003. I have a home group. It's the East Atlanta group of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you ever happen to be in Atlanta, Georgia on a Monday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Saturday, or a Sunday, we would love to see you. We're at the Eastside Church on Moreland Avenue. I have a sponsor, I sponsor others, and I am active in service work inside of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I say all those things just because they're incredibly important to the maintenance of my sobriety. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and share here tonight. It's been quite something to watch the explosion of online AA in the last few weeks here in the United States. And I can remember back when this meeting, the Fifth Dimension meeting started, it was myself and some other people who got together at the idea to do a specific young person's meeting online. And I think there were 5 or 6 of us on the first meeting of this group. And so to be on here tonight with, I don't know, 74 other people, I think you guys kicked the person who dropped the penis in the chat out, which I thought was kind of funny. You know, I was imagining that's a really original way to try to screw up someone's Zoom meeting, and I'm glad that's going to make it into the recording. But 74 now that we've got the penis guy out of here. It's really quite special. I've also been chuckling hearing everybody discovering Zoom as a platform, because I remember when we made the switch from Skype to Zoom on this meeting, and we talked about it ad nauseum for quite some time, and so that's been fun. This meeting came about at a very critical time for me. It started while I was bidding for the International Conference of Young People in AA, and then continued on through the year that I was the chair of the host committee for the 57th Ikipa. And I was also doing an incredible amount of traveling at that time, and it was almost impossible for me to attend any night of the week a meeting with any consistency, because I never knew if I was actually going to be home. And the Fifth Dimension meeting became my home group, because I knew no matter where I was in the world, I could get to this meeting. And I've called into this meeting from I don't know how many states and several foreign countries. And that has been really spectacular. Sorry about that. The internet is fun these days, so I'm back. I don't know exactly what happened there, but I was just saying that I have dialed into this meeting from I don't know how many different states in the U.S. and several foreign countries, and it was absolutely a lifesaver for me. I'll qualify real quick. I did not start drinking until I was a teenager. I was a late bloomer. There's a lot of challenges with alcohol in my family, so I was always, by necessity, opposed to the concept of alcohol. I also happen to be an extreme extrovert who's very scared of people. You may notice, if you can see me on the video, I've got a big red birthmark on the right side of my face, and growing up looking different. Am I back? Can y'all hear me? Okay. So anyway, what I was saying is, growing up looking different, you know, kids can be cruel and say a lot of things, and so that made me always very scared and shy in new situations, but I also happen to be very extroverted. So I grew up with this ridiculous conflict of really wanting to be the life of the party and yet being scared of being judged. And that was a really challenging thing psychologically to deal with. And when I finally decided to just get drunk for the first time, and I remember it pretty clearly, it was my best friend and I, We found a 6-pack of Milwaukee's Best buried in the woods behind his house. I guess it was probably, some other kid's stash that we discovered. And then we mixed this cocktail of every liquor that we could find off of his liquor cabinet, his parents' liquor cabinet, into a peanut butter jar. And we snuck out to his brother's tree fort. I'm 16 years old now. You gotta remember that. And got drunk that night. And, I remember thinking when I woke up the next morning with this ridiculously throbbing headache that I had found the solution to all my problems. And, I felt that way because it's like, as soon as I was under the influence of the alcohol, all of the depression and moodiness and anxiety and all of the things that had sort of characterized my existence up till that point all just went away. When I got to college, my drinking really took off. I became close to a daily drinker. I was able to graduate with a 3.0 in 4 years on guile and natural intelligence and begging teachers and whatever else I had to do, because really my primary objective in my 4 years at school was to drink myself silly. I was so incredibly selfish during that time. I went to a private small liberal arts college, and my parents paid essentially full tuition for me to go there. And so, my parents at that time were, paying like $30-something thousand a year for me to go to school. And they would come visit me twice a year at school. And, whenever they would visit me, the only thing I wanted to do was get rid of them as fast as possible on the weekend so that I could get drunk. That was it. It was like, I remember just being so annoyed with them at being there, and it's like that level of selfishness really characterized my drinking, and it really said something about my lack of executive function in terms of being able to actually control the impulse to drink alcohol, even when I knew that it was in my best interest. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because it's a short time, and that's okay. It's all good. But my drinking continued to escalate until the point at which I got married and had a child. It's probably the first time that I ever began to really have an inkling that there was something wrong with my drinking. And essentially what happened is I just realized at that point that I had limited capacity to control the amount that I drank. And so, with that realization, and it was really a subconscious realization, I didn't really understand it until later on, but I didn't really want my child to see me drunk, and so I wouldn't drink around her. And that really should have been my first clue. If I felt like I had to moderate my drinking behavior because I was concerned about how much I would drink, that should have been a clue. But I was able to still throw enough willpower at it then that I could get away with that. I got divorced not too long after my daughter was born. My ex-wife and I both have our own issues, and our marriage was incredibly volatile and was not destined to last. I had probably about another year and a half after that before I really got to my bottom. I moved back home to Washington, D.C. I started making a lot of money, and I started going out to clubs. That was my justification. I always had a justification for why I drank. When I was going through the divorce, it was, if you were going through what I was going through, you'd drink too, and I would sit in my house alone and get hammered. And then when I got to D.C. and I started making a bunch of money, I justified it as I'm going out. I'm going to be a club kid. I'm going to reinvent myself. But all that was just like rationale to continue the lifestyle that I wanted to continue and to justify it to myself. I got in some hairy situations while I was in that period of time, and I went to see a psychiatrist that I had seen when I was a teenager, and I can remember this clear as day. I was probably on my second or third appointment, and he was asking me about my alcohol consumption. And honestly, I was high functioning, right? So I didn't really think there was much wrong with my alcohol consumption. So I just told him, hey, I'm drinking 60 drinks a week or whatever, when he asked me like how many a week I was drinking. And, he's like, well, how many are you having in one night? And I was like, I don't know, 15, 20, like that doesn't seem like, when I was in college, right? And I was 29 when I got sober, right? So like when I was in college, like being able to drink a case of beer wasn't like something to hide. Like it was like, hey, I'm the guy that can drink the case of beer, And so I told the psychiatrist all that, and he said, I'd really like to put you on an antidepressant. I remember him saying that to me. I'd really like to put you on an antidepressant. And, I remember him saying, but I can't do it with the amount of alcohol you're drinking. And he's like, why not just go to the bar and have a drink or two and go home, right? Like, because that was my thing. It always started with a happy hour, right? Like my binges at that period of time always started with happy hour. And I remember like sitting up in his office, just kind of like a jerk. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I guess at that point, I'd acquired enough self-knowledge to know that there was like a switch at the front of my brain that flipped whenever any alcohol got into my system, because all I did once that switch flipped was just want more and more and more, right? It's like I could almost feel it click in my brain as soon as like that first therapeutic dose of vodka got into my tummy, or scotch or wine or whatever I was drinking to, claim that I was drinking for taste and not for effect. But I could feel the switch click, and it was like whatever plan I had was out the door, and the only plan that mattered at that point was getting more alcohol. And so I was like, no, man, I got to quit, I got to quit. And at that point I knew that I was going through these wild depressive swings. I knew they were related to my alcohol consumption. I knew I was behaving in ways that were not appropriate for my own sense of identity. So I was like, I got to quit. I just got to quit, And so that began like a 6-month period of trying to quit on my own. Like, I really appreciate this concept in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know that I necessarily always buy into some of their sort of pseudo-medical definitions of things in that book. It doesn't really matter because the program of action is great. But the one thing they do describe about alcoholism in that book that really resonates with me is this concept of like alcoholism being a 2-part disease or a 2-part disorder, right? One is like this physical side of it that says as soon as the substance is in my body, I just crave more and more and more of the substance. And I got to that point, like right there in that psychiatrist's office. But there's this second part, which is this thing that like, no matter how much I know about myself, no matter how afraid I am of what alcohol is going to do to me, no matter how much I want to quit. And I can tell you that like during that time, I wanted to quit with every ounce of will in my body. And I threw every ounce of will in my body at it. But the second part says that there's this like weird twist of thought in my brain that no matter how much I want to quit, at some point, I'm going to take a drink again. And I remember reading the story of Fred the accountant in the big book for the first time. He's got all this self-knowledge of himself, and he crosses the threshold of this dining hall, and he says to himself as he's crossing the threshold, a highball would be good with dinner. And I resonated so much with that, because what would happen to me in that period where I was really trying to stop is I would go to the bar with my coworkers for happy hour, and I would be telling myself over and over and over again, I'm going to order a Diet Coke, I'm going to order a Diet Coke, I'm going to order a Diet Coke. And then out of nowhere, I would just order a double vodka, right? Like I would just think that that was a good idea. That went on for a while until eventually I came to a place where I realized that I was incapable of stopping alcohol on my own. And I ultimately thought that I was just going to be doomed to go through this cycle of trying to quit and falling off the wagon and trying to quit and falling off the wagon, because that's what would happen to me in that time frame. And fortunately, I worked with someone who was in Alcoholics Anonymous. I tend to be very open about my alcoholism with coworkers and others for this reason right here. I knew she was in AA, and I reached out to her for help, and she brought me to my first meeting. And there's a whole series of amazing things that happened in those first few months that I'm gonna blow by, but nevertheless know that coincidence or a power greater than myself or some combination of the two intervened in some pretty miraculous ways in those first few months. I got a sponsor. I was pulled out of a situation in the Charles de Gaulle airport where I was absolutely convinced that I was going to drink. I started working the steps. I was able to make incredible amends to my ex-wife. And I'll say this, I want to pause and talk about the 9th step for a second, because I got there. I did an inventory and I got to the 9th step, and I had to make these amends to my ex-wife, and I couldn't stand my ex-wife. To this day, I still struggle with that. And honestly, like objectively, and I've done a lot of work on this, right? Objectively, if you look at the scales, like she did a lot more to me than I ever did to her. And AA's process says, doesn't matter, right? You just cut off her side. That is not your problem. You deal with this. And so despite the fact that I objectively thought the scales were not even, I made amends to her. And as a result of that, I have been able to be an effective parent to my child. I've had times when I've had to intervene in her relationship with her mother, and I've been able to do that in ways that are not driven by resentment or anger or a desire for revenge, all as a result of that 9th step. I took a lot of money from my father when I was drinking, and as part of the 9th step, I had an opportunity to pay that money back. And you know, I had 8 years of sobriety before my dad passed away, and those 8 years were some of the best times that my dad and I ever had. And we became close friends. He came to me for advice, which was mind-blowing to me. All as a result of the 9th step. The 9th step is probably one of the most beautiful things that I have ever encountered. Had an opportunity to get involved in Young People's AA. That's a great story. I don't have time for it, but I'd love to tell it someday. You know, I got an opportunity to bid for ICYPA with some of my closest friends when I moved to Florida. I moved to Florida right after my dad passed away with no friends there. I had a great community and support system in Atlanta where I was from. And through the process of bidding for ICYPA in Florida, I made some of the best friends that I've ever had in my life. You know, one person's on this call tonight who I consider to be one of the closest people to me in the world, and that's all as a result of that service work. We had an opportunity to host an ICYPA in Miami that was just a life-changing experience for me. And I'm going to end on a little bit of what's been going on with me, and then we'll kick it open for a topic. So I found myself last February with 16 years of sobriety in the mental hospital. Not somewhere I ever expected to be. It was incredibly demoralizing. But what I discovered was that I had obsessive compulsive disorder and have for a large period of my life, and had just been managing the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And they had gotten to a point where I was going to either drink or harm myself. Not sure if y'all can hear me or not, because I got booted again.
We can hear you.
And, oh, great. So hopefully I will get connected to the Zoom meeting again, but I'm going to keep talking. So I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and spent a week in inpatient in the mental hospital. And then 30 days after that on an intensive outpatient program, and then had to engage in some of the most difficult therapy of my life to ever to come to terms with how to live with that condition. And it was a real struggle for me for a while to get back connected with Alcoholics Anonymous. There was just something different about that experience that really made it hard for me to resonate with AA for quite some time. And I would go to meetings and spend all through what, you know, talking through in my head what everybody else was sharing and judging it and finding fault with it. And it was really a tough period. you know, and I guess what I'll say is I feel like I've come out of that, you know. My recovery from both OCD and from alcoholism is going amazing. I'm really grateful that I didn't drink because that would have probably led to my suicide in that time. But I'm also grateful for this sort of deeper understanding of my relationship to Alcoholics Anonymous, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, a program that worked really, really well for my alcoholism. And in a lot of ways, it helps me a lot day to day, dealing with the everyday issues of life. It's made me a better person. But I can also understand that it's not the solution to everything for me, and that everything I hear in AA doesn't have to be taken as truth, right? Like I can figure out with the help of my network and my friends the things I can take and the things I can leave. And coming to some freedom with that has really opened up a whole new level of experiencing AA for me, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm also just grateful that I'm seeing a lot more, it feels like I'm seeing a lot more acceptance of, you know, people struggling with other mental health issues inside the rooms. That's been something that's been nice to see. And, you know, I'm really, really happy with where I'm at in my recovery across the board right now. I'm incredibly grateful to be here tonight, and I'm just so thrilled and blown away by the service that this meeting is doing during this coronavirus time. And, you know, I feel a bit like a proud elder statesman tonight, just looking over this and what it's become. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who picked the torch up with this meeting and carried it and kept it going. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut up. I love all of you. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love being sober today, and it's just a real honor to have this opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, James. That's great.
That was great. Thanks.
Now we have a brief announcement about the seventh tradition.